not all engagements are created equal, right? And definitely, if you look at it through this engagement yield lens, you can quickly see, you might have two opportunities with identical budgets. Let's say clients, looking to spend 50K to get some kind of work done, but from there, like if you bring in the engagement yield lens, you might be looking at two very different opportunities.
Yeah, and that's, if you kind of go down the line and think about, we all see it where you take on a client, it's not exactly the right fit, but the money is there, and you just have to understand what kind of the limitation is, especially when thinking about your team has a limited capacity on how they can spend their time. You got to really think about the engagement yield potential, or you might have a client where they may have a clause where you can't talk about the work, you can't publicize it, and that's a something that we come up against where is that worth it to do all the work, and you can't talk about it, to can't put it on your site, can't create a case study that you
Yeah.
can publicize. Those are all kind of downstream impacts of that engagement. But you could have referral potential, or you can have a relationship with that person. So every it's not so cut and dry on uh, what's weighted higher than the other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that we actually haven't talked about, and this just occurred to me is, it is possible to select poorly and get negative engagement yield too, right? I mean, I think you could argue that, like, there's an opportunity cost to taking on the wrong kind of client, where it just kind of takes your team away from building, expertise in something, learning more, and maybe you drop the ball on that, and now
Oh
you have
yeah.
reputational damage. So now relationships wise, you're cooked there. And on top of that, you're not gonna get referrals. You might actually get people bad mouthing you, and then, like, keep people away from hiring you. So
Oh man,
it
yeah.
yeah, that it is very possible. Negative yield, engagement yield is very much possible too, and so it's something to be aware of.
More money from a revenue standpoint, yeah, could hurt you versus a lower budget project with a much higher yield. So you got to kind of look at the full
It
picture there.
Yeah, and this is where I think the long-term perspective on things can really, make your decision making become clearer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about positioning, your the agency to actually generate engagement yield. So, we touched upon some of this earlier, but yeah, let's just reel off some things that agencies can do.
Yeah. I think one thing on the idea of leverage and really learning from each engagement is having a structured debrief process to think about what are the things that we learned, and like are there common patterns that we can then create an SOP around, or process or template, etc., that we can take into the next engagement.
Yep.
But I think, yeah, just setting aside the time and making that part of your internal
Yes. So
process.
either
Yeah.
debriefs, or we might call it after action reviews, or anything like that,
Yep.
right? Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah.
Another is yeah, just deliberate client surveys. And that could take many forms, but just thinking about it, not just as a check, like did we ask the client if they're happy with working with us or not, but using it as an opportunity to think about, maybe it's if they're in a state of appreciation for the work you've done for them, maybe it's a good time to ask for a referral. Say, is there someone else in their network that could benefit from the work that we've done for them? So just thinking beyond just the tactics of that survey.
Yeah, definitely. And then, just hitting on the proof side of things, building a system to actually generate case studies on a regular basis. So I know, across some of our Barrel Holdings agencies, they might set aside time every quarter to publish, X number of case studies, and make that kind of a regular thing. Or they might also pair that with like a newsletter that goes out once a month, where they feature some kind of proof for their list, and then that can also be used on social media as a proof point as well. So just kind of getting that going, and then, along with that, kind of, the documentation that might come from something like the after action review, or just in general along the course of an engagement.
Yeah. And yeah, to touch on the relationship piece, I think, you kind of go through the exercise of like really intentionally mapping all the people that you've worked with, all the relationships, all the people within the organization who you may have had conversations, but they may not be your immediate point of contact, and just having a good landscape of everyone that's in your network now
Yeah.
that then you can kind of talk to, and maybe those are people that could be, jumping off points for new referrals.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's simple things like you meet all these people. Let's say at a kickoff, there's like 7 8 people from the client side, and maybe you haven't met most of them because you've only been talking with like a single or a couple point of contact folks. But after that meeting, like adding those folks on LinkedIn, and
Yeah.
then just adding obviously getting them into the CRM, and then on top of that, like maybe even getting on the newsletter list as well, because like you just never know, like how important it might be to stay in touch and top of mind for these folks over time. Because yeah, we've seen so many times like folks that were super junior when we started working with them. Maybe 7 years later, they've
Yeah.
become like the director of marketing somewhere else, and they're like, hey, I remember working with you guys. Here's and that was a great experience, and here's an opportunity for you. So it just it pays to just pay attention to those small details.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe, and a lot of this stuff we do talk about in some of our past episodes. So, I think episode 7, right? We talked about the 10 essential habits for running a successful agency. So there, we did touch upon, after action reviews, client feedback surveys, and consistent weekly outreach on a regular basis. Any other episodes that we should mention?
Um, Episode 18, where we talk about, it's titled "Why Agencies Rely on Referrals, but Few Treat It as a System." So, really talking about the process of, asking for referrals and a state of appreciation, building referral lists, really staying top of mind. And yeah, we go really in depth into the idea of referrals.
Yeah. So check those 2 episodes out if you want to go deeper in these.